panel 22. This panel is on synergizing tools and methods of practice. Now, as we heard today in the plenary, and as most of us are aware, if we are talking about effective adaptive planning or adaptive strategies, a prerequisite is information. It's important, as we heard in the morning today, to know about risks and vulnerabilities that communities or the different levels of governance, whether it's provincial or at the national level, the vulnerabilities which are there, the risks which are rising because of these vulnerabilities, and the measurements of these are important if we want to bring about effective adaptive strategies, if we want to make planning effective. And in this process, the role of tools are essential. And today's panel, we are going to be talking mostly on tools, which are applied at different levels, but all of them to basically ensure that we have effective formulation of adaptive strategies. Now, I have a panel which is composed of people who have been working with tools at different levels. And we have Oyuntuya from Mongolia, who is the Vice Director of the Mongolian State University of Agriculture. We have Kenya Kono from the FAO, who is the Program Officer in the Climate Change Working Group. We have Jonathan Shott, who is the Project Manager of Sustainable Development Foundation. We have Rachna Arora, who is from GIZ in Delhi. And I am Dhrupad Choudhury from ICIMOD, which is based in Kathmandu. The presentations are going to be, would take you through tools which are at various levels. So we start with an overview and then slowly work our way through till we come to those tools which are dealing with communities. And the sequence of presentation would be, we would start with the presentation from Mongolia, followed by Ken, and then by Jonathan. Then we take a short break where we take in questions from the participants here. After that, we would move to the other two remaining presentations, and we would have Rachna talking about her the tool that she's been using, and followed by me. And after which we again open up for discussions and for all. So I would then request Oyuntuya, please, to give the first presentation.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to introduce in Mongolian some toolkits and methods. Mongolia is an agricultural country. I would like to talk about adaptation toolkits and methods in agricultural sector. Examples: result of meteorological surveys conducted in North Teaching and Research Center at the Mongolian State University of Agriculture. In the recent years, particularly in 2008 to 2010, the weather condition didn't repeat it in the same time during the growth periods of plants. In other words, the most suitable periods with enough moisture and temperature were occurred in the middle and or in the beginning and end of growth. In this situation, the use of changeable technology worked out by the researchers gave its good result. Comparison of air temperatures in each month revealed start period of growth of April and May in 2008 were relatively cooler. Third decade of June and first decade of July were humid, while precipitation lacked in remaining periods. In 2009, June, July relatively warmer and September were cooler. Third decade of June and first decade of August were humid, while precipitation lacked in remaining periods. April and May 2010 were cooler. First decade of June and second decade of August were humid, while precipitation lacked in the remaining periods. During of sudden cold exposure, this drought called for 3 consecutive years, were 99 to 128 are different by 16 to 29 days. Revealed climate conditions are very unstable. It's also an evidence that following of the same technology in all crop production practices impossible. The earlier predictions of weather forecasts by people with advanced activities tended to increase their own profits or minimize any hazards with making arrangements. Convertible crop production technology, which is used in spring planting in association with seasonal climate conditions, ensure full utilization of precipitation and heat reserves during plant growth period. Adjustment of plantation period, seed norm, seeding depth, and varieties of grain crop, and fertilizer types and dosage to climate condition can minimize change crop rotations. As a result of gradual and slight increase of irrigated crop fields is reached 31,000 ha by 2009. This is a selected method producing significant outcomes for a shorter period for combining aridification. However, it consumes greater cost for construction and therefore increase of field area slower. Production practice show maximum crop production in irrigated conditions in both warmer gobi and steppe region is 45 to 50 centner per ha. In central region, 20 to 26 centner per ha. In order to improve adaptation capacity of seeds, it is necessary to develop the new variety of seeds with adaptable characteristics such as very type and resistance of heat and disease. Wheat of one new variety, Dacham 144, developed in Teaching and Research Institute of Crop Science, has 16 center ha in dry years, while wheat of Dacham 74 variety gives 27.9 to 34 centner per ha products. However, it's wise to make clear that above is not maximal potential level for these varieties. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Oyuntuya. With this presentation, I think one of the tools that you see is how the measurement or the understanding of climate variability, what are the operational aspects that you can bring in. I would request now Kinya from FAO to make his presentation, which consists of a PowerPoint and a video as well, which is on e-learning, planning for community toolkit. It's an e-learning toolkit which is for planning for community-based adaptation. Katie.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to very pleased to introduce the FAO e-learning toolkit for planning for community-based adaptation and climate change. So I'd like to start from a very fundamental question. So why toolkit, and who are we going to support, and how the toolkit can support? I just want to share my little experience. When I was staying in a small village in Indonesia, it's 2,000 kilometers away from Jakarta. I was staying in a small house of extension worker, and the raindrop wake me up every morning from the ceiling, and then the bucket of cold water wake me up doubly, and then I go to the village riding one motorbike, holding tight to the extension worker's body, not because I'm in love with him, but because I will be thrown off because of the damp, hilly road. And he was very trusted from the community members, and he solved all the problems from agriculture to livestock, and he was very dedicated to his work. However, one day he talked to me, Kenya, there's something strange happening. The rainfall starts early, and the dry season is becoming severe, and I don't know what to deal with it. I think we would like to support these people, and this toolkit is to support these people. And I think many of you here is also to support communities directly, or to support these dedicated community leaders. So with this introduction, I'd like to introduce the contents. So this toolkit is built for that purpose and can be used for field technician and also for government and non-government organizations. And it's already disseminated in English, French, and Spanish. This is the table of contents of the toolkit. We have 4 modules. The first and second module is about climate change itself, and also how the climate change affects the food security, and especially for agriculture production. And by learning this in depth, the practitioner becomes more serious to how to prepare and implement the community-based adaptation. And then that's the module 3 and 4. And in this module, you can see the full picture of how step by step prepare for community-based adaptation with their own knowledge. Of course, in case of extension worker, they also have a lot of experience, and they can combine their experience into toolkit. And also we have an implementation module. So that's basically the key feature. And I wish to stress this is not about providing one-size-fits-all solution, but rather just providing a variety of options. So for module 1, it's a bit of scientific background of climate change itself, and people talk about climate change, but what is it? Then that can be answered by this module. And it's an exercise you can interactively, in a way, you can put your answer, and if it's wrong, it tells you, so you can learn. This is some trial to make it as much as interesting and not boring, just by reading. And in module 2, we focus on the climate change and its effect to crop production. And this is one of the sheets how the worldwide farmland is affected by climate change. In module 3, we have sets of sessions of preparing for community-based adaptation, starting from vulnerability, the risk assessment, and how to assess the institutional settings, and also to identify the best option for suitable adaptation options, and how to make the adaptation strategies in community level. And this is an example of one session identifying adaptation options, and we have some video like this, and I just briefly just wanna show very briefly. Okay, I understand. So this is maybe I can show it later. And module 4, we focus on implementation and how to start and where to start. Well, even though we have a good plan under facilitating discussions, we need to be very sure how to implement it. And to start it, it's very important to mobilize the interest and involvement and engagement of community. So that's why this starts from community mobilization. And also, we think it's very important to have a test of adaptation practice, because by testing and seeing the good results of the adaptation options, villagers finally understand that's good, and then they will continue it. So we have guidance on this very important session as well. And this video actually explains how to do it. And this toolkit, maybe you might be interested in how was it developed. We had a number of training in almost all the continents, Asia, Africa, and South America. And we received some feedback, and it was incorporated in it. So, key message from this tool is, well, we have to do adaptation right now. Even if it's not sure, we have to be proactive and anticipatory. That's one thing. And secondly, no one-size-fits-all solution. Even this is a toolkit, and you might maybe have an assumption that toolkit might be limited, have a limitation. It may have maybe wrong guidance. However, we really don't want to have that situation. So this toolkit is providing a number of options, and the community can choose. And lastly, these kind of most successful, well, not these kinds, but most successful examples are dispersed all over the world. So we tried our best to incorporate the essence into this toolkit so that people can learn in an efficient way. And this toolkit is available all in website, and it's available in French and Spanish, so you can go and access. And in your desk, you also have a CD-ROM. And if you don't have it, please let me know. I have some extra, so please come to me after this workshop. And I just wanna show very first part of the video. This is the real screen of this toolkit. And, just selecting this session, and then you can reach to this video, which is actually not developed by FAO itself, but we found from the open resource.
The effects of climate change, combined with deforestation, can trigger a cycle of erosion leading to desertification. But simple techniques can help to retain moisture, reduce erosion, and support the growth of crops. For example, planting trees. And the rock wall and the technique called demi-lunes or half-moons you see being constructed here.
The technique is called demi-lune. You use it to trap rain when it falls. When it rains, the water runs between the two demi-lunes and flows into the next one. The hole holds the water for some days so the seed can grow.
This is very dry land. Before I started using these techniques, you couldn't find grass or trees. These techniques nourish the soil and retain the water so that trees and plants can grow. It is now rejuvenated and very green again.
Simple water conservation and irrigation mean that farmers are no longer reliant on the timing of the rains and can even plan for more than one harvest a year.
Formerly, we were doing our gardens with wells, but we noticed the water from the wells was not enough. So we contacted the NGO and asked for support to build a dam. Thanks to the dam, our income has increased and I have doubled the plot of land for cultivation. So with better income, I can send my kids to school.
Thank you, Kina.
Thank you very much.
We just saw, I think, with Kina's presentation, the different levels at which you can have these tools and what are the uses that you can make out of these. I would quickly move to the next presentation, which is by Jonathan. Jonathan is going to give us an overview of different vulnerability assessment toolkits, which are simple and have an integrated approach for use by local stakeholders. Jonathan also has a small video which looks at promoting local innovations.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Joe. I work for Sustainable Development Foundation, a small Thai NGO. We have 17 staff and all Thai apart from myself. I spend most of my days speaking and writing in Thai these days, so apologies if my English isn't as good as it used to be. As Dhrupad just said, there are two parts to my presentation. Firstly, I'm going to talk about SDF's approach to vulnerability and capacity assessment. And then secondly, I'm going to show a short video on something called promoting local innovation, which is a technique that we use to come up with adaptation strategies at the local level. I just want to say quickly that I'm going to go very quickly. There are a lot of slides, and I'll skim over them very quickly so that if people are interested, they can speak to me afterwards. I just want to say that our approach was different at SDF. We were working a lot with local communities and local stakeholders, and we could see that there are very, very many different toolkits and different methodologies for doing vulnerability and capacity assessment. And most of the local stakeholders we worked with said it was very confusing. They didn't know which one to choose. So SDF looked at about 30 or 40 different toolkits, including some of the big ones like the CVCA toolkit developed by CARE International and IDS. And we looked at UNDP's approach. We looked at the approach of the International Federation and Red Cross. And we basically tried to answer the question, what is VCA? We looked at 30 or 40 different methods and tried to condense it down into the simplest terms that we could so that local communities could work with it. So basically what we see is VCA has 4 parts, and I'm just going to very quickly spend maybe about 1 minute on each part. So we think you need a conceptual framework. You need to know what it is you're talking about, what areas you need to study, what information, what questions you need to ask. So that's the conceptual framework. You need an overall process, you need some steps. If you're going to work with a local community or some local stakeholders, you need to know what you're going to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then in doing those steps, people said we need tools. Maybe we know what the steps are, but when we go to the community, we need some concrete tool that we can use. And then finally, you need some kind of reporting format. If you do the study, if you do the analysis and assessment, you need some way to report the results. So let's look at the conceptual framework first. And basically, it's kind of like the old IPCC framework, so they've changed it now. We still have kind of like the old version. And basically, we tell the communities it's like a seesaw. So you have exposure and sensitivity on the one side, and you have coping capacity and adaptive capacity on the other side. And whichever side is heavier wins. If you have more exposure and sensitivity, then you're at risk and you're vulnerable. If you have more coping and adaptive capacity, then you're resilient. And exposure is just what's changing that's bringing risk, that's bringing hazard into your life. And sensitivity is when the hazard comes, how likely are you to be impacted, or how badly impacted you're going to be. And this is possibly the most important slide in my whole presentation. Basically, from the 30 or 40 different VCA methodologies we studied, this is what it comes down to. Your exposure is coming from two areas. The two things that are going to change and make you more at risk are climate and non-climate factors. Just only that. And then the three things that are going to influence how badly impacted you are when some risk comes into your life are what your livelihood options are like at the moment, how you manage your natural resources, and how you manage your land and infrastructure. And I won't go into the details, but we can give more information on these. So for example, the climate factors and the non-climate factors, what are they? And I'll skip over these for the sake of speed, but we can talk more later. And similarly, in terms of sensitivity, what's determining how badly impacted you will be? We can break all of those down into a little bit more detail. And that's basically, so we just try to say very simply to the communities, that's basically all you need to do to assess vulnerability. And then in terms of capacity, we try to highlight that you need to move from traditional disaster risk reduction, where the focus was on response, on stabilizing emergencies, rehabilitating, protecting from future risk. You need to move more to securing your resources, developing and adapting. And what we're looking to try and do basically is to reduce sensitivity that we have at the moment, because if we're already receiving impacts, then we need to address those first. Then moving up a level, we're trying to manage exposure, both now and in the future. And then finally, if we can do that, we're looking to increase resilience, flexibility, and diversity. So that's the conceptual framework. The overall process, we have a 10-step process. Starts with capacity building, then gathers information to be able to assess vulnerability. Once we know what we're vulnerable to, we can come up with some goals. What do we want to do to address our vulnerability? And then only once we have the goals can we assess the capacity. At SDF, we think many VCA frameworks say, let's assess capacity, but they don't say capacity for what? Capacity to adapt to climate change, that's huge. So SDF, we say you have to come up with a specific goal first. Let's rehabilitate fishery resources near to the coast. Okay, we can assess capacity for that. So the goal setting comes first, and then you assess the capacity and you do your planning. I just want to highlight two parts of this process. The very first two parts, we say that you have to do capacity building first. So before you do anything else, you have to make it clear to the local stakeholders what climate change is and what climate change adaptation is. To make sure you all know what you're talking about and you all have the same understanding. And then you also need to talk about information gathering, because doing vulnerability and capacity assessment is all about information. So you need to make people at the local level understand what the sources of information are and how they should ask, question that information and record it. And that's basically all I'll say on the overall process. Tools and methods, the one thing I would like to say is that most of the tools and methods are tools and methods that we're all familiar with. There aren't very many new tools for vulnerability and capacity assessment. They're mostly existing participatory rural appraisal tools. And these are just a few that we've found particularly useful. So some of them, like the seasonal calendar and the community map, everybody will be familiar with. Some others maybe you've not heard of so much. But the vulnerability matrix, which is part of the CARE and IDS approach, is a very empowering tool for communities. So you basically pick a set of exposure factors, maybe climate, and then you pick an area of sensitivity, maybe livelihoods, and you say what are the five most important livelihoods, and what are the 5 biggest climate threats, and you rank them in this matrix. And then the 6W2H is just like the standard tool used by journalists. So once you know where your vulnerability is, you use this tool to get the detail. So instead of saying fishers are at risk from decreased marine resources, you say, who are the fishers? All of them? Just some of them? the poor fishers, the rich fishers, the commercial fishers. You use this table to try and get the exact detail of who those, exactly who those people are and what kind of risk it is. And then for the final tool, for the capacity analysis, we use something which is a combination of SWOT analysis and something called H charts or H diagrams, which were developed by UNDP as part of their VCA approach. So just to look in a little bit of detail, at the top we have internal strengths and weaknesses. So the strengths on the left, the weaknesses on the right. Once you know what you're going to do, you use this chart to look at whether you have enough knowledge and skills to be able to do it, whether you have people who are going to be responsible, whether you have the financial resources and equipment that you need. And then at the bottom, you just look at what your external opportunities and threats are going to be under climate change. And then the final part is that we suggest a reporting format. So once you've conducted the study, we suggest that you have a report that breaks into 4 parts. So the first 2 parts are a general introduction and some background where you say how you conducted the study and you describe what the area is like, what the expected changes are under climate change, who are the different socioeconomic groups, and then you have your analysis and your suggestions for the way forward. So we have a much more detailed reporting format than this, but this is just at the summary level. And just to finish, these are some photographs of vulnerability and capacity analysis we did in one sub-district in Dhrupad province in eastern Thailand. We worked with 600 villagers over a period of 4 days, working quite late into the night as well in some cases to carry out the vulnerability and capacity analysis there. So that's all I'm going to say on vulnerability and capacity assessment, and now I'll put the video for about 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So the video talks about one particular community in a place called Bang Chan in Choudhury province in the east of Thailand. From the vulnerability and capacity assessment, we knew that one problem they had was water. They have no drinking water or household water. And we used this technique called promoting local innovation to try and come up with some solutions, some different adaptation strategies which would help to cope with the drinking water problem. So I'll just let you watch that video. Today we've come to village number 2 in Bang Chan sub-district to look at the problem of drinking water and the water that they use within their households. And we're conducting a workshop called Promoting Local Innovation to see what possible solutions there might be to solve the problems they have with water in the village.
ผมเกิดในพื้นที่นะครับเพราะงั้นผมจะทราบถึงปัญหาว่าตรงนี้เป็นพื้นที่ที่เราไม่สามารถหาแหล่งน้ำในพื้นที่ได้เลยไม่มีน้ำจืดในพื้นที่เลยในส่วนของเรื่องน้ำเนี่ยที่เรามีอยู่ณปัจจุบันนี้ประมาณ4 เดือนที่เราได้จากแหล่งน้ำฝนนะครับ4 เดือนส่วนที่เหลืออีก8 เดือนเราต้องพึ่งพาเรือที่ใช้ตักจากฝั่งของจังหวัดตากนะครับแต่ถึงเวลาหน้าแล้งเนี่ยซื้อน้ำนะซื้อไปตักน้ำบ่อมาให้ซื้อที่ไหนคะซื้อเรือมีมาขายลิตรละเท่าไหร่คะขายแพง100 กว่าบาทโอ้160ก็ใช้ได้กี่วันคะแพงใช้ไม่กี่วันต้องซักผ้าอยู่ไหนด้วยเสร็จการใช้ดื่มได้ไหมคะได้แต่ดื่มก็ไม่เดียวข้างละท้องเสียหน้ามันก็เรือมันขึ้นจากทางกระบอกเลยก็ต้องอยู่เป็นสายอยู่เนี่ยแต่ว่ามันเทไปที่ต้นไม้เราของตำรวจ
It's a community that's in the middle of a mangrove forest area, so access to water is difficult because the water all around them is salt water. And to get water into the area, it has to come in by boat because there are no roads. When they have this kind of problem already at the present day, in the future, in the climate change, it's expected that rainfall is going to become more sporadic, maybe heavier at some times of the year, but at other times of the year there'll be less rainfall. And the summer season will be drier and perhaps a bit longer. So the existing problems that they have with drinking water are likely to become much worse in the future.
PLI means Promotion of Local Innovation. It's a workshop that we use to engage local communities to take action for climate change adaptation. During the 3 days, participants were asked to do different activities. The first day started with an analysis of the drinking water program. In the afternoon, participants discussed about the vision and brainstormed on possible innovations that help to get a little bit closer to their vision. Then, on the second day, they were collecting more information on the innovations they selected the day before. One group went to a field trip to collect information on a pipe water system from a village that has successfully established their own water management. The rest of the participants attended the marketplace where they discussed the different aspects of the innovations. They learned that the local innovation needs to be adapted to their own environment and that a local innovation needs to consider not only the technical aspects of an innovation, but also the ecological, economic, social, and cultural aspects. On the last day, participants developed an action plan which clearly defined what are the actions that needs to be done, who are the persons responsible for it, what are the resources needed, and what is the timeline for each activity in the action plan.
แล้วหลังจากจบครั้งนี้ก็มีแผนงานร่วมกันที่จะทำงานเกี่ยวกับเรื่องการแก้ปัญหาของแหล่งน้ำนะครับก็ถือว่าเราได้แผนพอสมควรในการที่จะทำก็คงจะคิดว่าในวันข้างหน้าคงจะมีการพัฒนาแล้วก็มีการทำตามกระบวนการหรือแผนการที่เราได้วางไว้ในครั้งนี้ให้สำเร็จรุ่ร่วงขอบคุณครับ
That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. What we are going to do now is open up for questions on the first three presentations. We need to keep in mind that what we are trying to probe in this panel is appropriateness of tools for bringing about synergies with methods of practice and also in planning. So I would invite questions or comments from the participants. I would say that we can spend about 20 minutes on having this interaction and then move to the next two presentations which are there. Right? So if there are any questions, please identify yourself, pointed comments and questions if you have. Right? Keep in mind that the longer you take to make your point or ask the question, there are others whom you're depriving from interacting with the panelists. Yes, please.
I'm Dung Nguyen from Challenge to Change NGOs in Vietnam. My question related to how we can motivate people learning each other. I mean here, you apply some tools through the internet-based training or like a VCA. But can you? My question may be related to the three presentations. Can you share any experience? That's how you motivate or stimulate, you know, like the farmer to farmer, or how the people can learn each other, especially at the community, and also the learner about the lesson learner at the groundwork.
Before the panelists answer that, can I just tell you that if you wait for the next two presentations, perhaps you'll get some answers to your question.
Okay.
But however, if some of the panelists want to, you know, maybe Joe and Ken, you want to immediately react?
Thank you very much for your question. And yes, I think it's very critical to mobilize the participation and also learning each other from in the community. And we do understand that's an important aspect. So I just want to quickly show what's reflected in the toolkit. So I think especially this session, session 1, community mobilization of the first step of the implementation of the community-based adaptation action plan is particularly answering your question. So we think it's a key process, and we are now here introducing an example from Bangladesh to do some play on the cyclone preparedness exercise. So maybe you can have a quick look. So this is showing, how to draw the attention of the community, and this can be one of the options to use. And another one, I think it's also maybe familiar to many of you, but this is a case from Cambodia to show the flood preparedness.
I saw the Vietnamese letter.
Yes, yes. It's from your country, actually.
I'm from Vietnam.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. That's kidding.
In any disaster risk reduction effort, the design and implementation of a good public awareness program is one of the most effective ways to reach out to stakeholders. Recognizing this, a major public awareness campaign was undertaken by the FEMS to complement and reinforce its other objectives. Printed materials were used most widely, such as these flood information booklets, which contained information about flood preparedness measures and survival tips during floods.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about this toolkit is you don't need to Google search for 2 hours to find the best example to mobilize the community's interest. And I think that's actually it can be possible, but can be a difficult part for many practitioners in the field. So this toolkit can be used as a library, let's say, to a particular point you wish to improve. That's my question. Answered.
Yeah.
I think another thing that you can do to motivate people is to find an adaptation strategy that brings them immediate benefit at the present day as well. So for example, the community I showed in my video, Bangchan community, 5 villages in 250,000 acres of mangrove forest. And everything they do is illegal because under Thai law you're not allowed to live or to fish in a mangrove forest. And they have no water, no fresh water. if we can do something to solve both of these problems, we don't need to motivate the community. Definitely they will work with us, because we're solving problems that they have at the present day. But also, we're helping them to prepare for climate change in the future, because at the moment, if they want to work with government agencies or request budget for that village, they can't request any budget, because the government agency will say you are an illegal community. We can't allocate budget to you. Similarly with water, we know in the future they're probably going to have more problems with drought, so if we can solve their problem of access to water at the present day, definitely they will be interested in that, but we also help them to cope with climate change in the future. When we conducted the PLI workshop, and Robert Mather is from ACIMOD with us, who's at the workshop as well, I think we calculated for that one community of about 1,200 people, that their annual bill for the water for the whole year for the community was about 2.5 million bahts, because all of their water has to be brought in by boats, even for washing and cleaning vegetables. So I think the way to motivate people is to give them immediate results, but also prepare them for climate change in the future.
I think the underlying thing is that if you are addressing issues which are pressing livelihood issues of the communities, and you can use different approaches, different tools. I think Ken's presentation showed you what are the entry points, or how you can have the entry points, whether it's play acting, whether it's through the playing out what happens in cyclones or in flood. But it's relating to livelihoods, and as soon as that is there, it's the community is convinced that this is something which addresses the concerns that they have. You immediately have the mobilization which is there. Any other? Yeah, please.
Myself, Mukesh Sinha from India. Toolkit has to be prepared based on the local needs. Now my worry is, because of course India is very large, there is a huge population. What should be the most appropriate size of the toolkit preparation?
Joe, you want to go for that?
I can give an initial response. So like I said, in the case of SDF's work, I think we would very much agree that the toolkit that you used maybe has to be appropriate to the local context. And we could see all of these different toolkits out there, and we didn't know which one to choose. So for us, what we tried to do was not have another toolkit, but just to find what are the important things to study, but not say exactly how you should do it at every step, because we think that most of us working at the field level, we have a lot of experience of participatory rural appraisal, we have a lot of experience of different toolkits, and all we need to know is what the aim is, what the target is, what questions we should be asking. But the actual method and the steps, we think that most people at the field level are skilled enough to be able to do that if we just give some overall guideline. I don't know if that addresses the question.
My question was about the size, like let's say about 1 village or 10 villages or 1 district. What should be the appropriate size of the toolkit preparation? That's it.
Maybe I can answer that. When you're taking up any participatory assessments, the PRAs are the easiest when you're working with the communities. You shouldn't have too large a sites, right? I think the maximum that you could have is perhaps a size of, where you're engaging the communities, a size of around 30 or 35, drawn out from different villages, right? That, of course, when you're looking at it from your point of view as an administrator, it's a drop in the ocean, as it were, right? But which means that you've got to repeat the same approach in different clusters.
A little bit more. Just a little bit more then. I think there are 2 questions that you need to ask there. One is the point that Dhrupad addressed, which is, if you're going to have a workshop or some process, how many people can you handle? The case we did in Dhrupad province, we had 600 people for 4 days, but we could do that because we had a big team of facilitators, and because during the day we had large meetings, and then in the evening we went to individual villages. So that's one thing you need to think about, how many people can you facilitate. But the other question you need to ask is about vulnerability. If some of your vulnerability is coming from the ecosystem level, and you try to work in just one village, then you'll never solve the problem, because the problem is coming from other parts of the ecosystem. So maybe you work one village at a time, But maybe the problem in that area means that you have to work on every village in the ecosystem to be able to solve the problem.
Thank you. Chris Benny from IDS. Actually, I would like to complement perhaps what Joe has presented. I'm not familiar with the whole methodology, but from the presentation at least, what seems to be implemented is mainly focus group discussion. And from experience from the field, what we have also observed is that it's actually fundamentally critical to go down and break down those communities by level of welfare, if you want. Because what you're going to observe is that the nature and the intensity of vulnerability will not be the same even within the same communities. And unless you break down that communities by groups, you will actually miss part of the picture that you're trying to get. So probably that's what you do, Joe, but it wasn't clear from the presentation.
Just to respond.
I would very much agree with that. And, so I think that part of the framework that SDF has came from collaboration with Bruce Raverslew at Care International in Thailand. And I think Care's CDCA system was developed in collaboration with IDS, if I'm not mistaken. You'll see in the overall 10-step process, step number 2 is to give training on information gathering. And as one part of that, we get communities to really analyze their community. So we say, in this community, what are your livelihoods? And maybe we say fisher, they say fishers, maybe say 90% of fishers. And we say, are they all the same fishers? Is everybody fishing in the sea, or do some people fish in the canals? Do some people do aquaculture? How many boats do people have? So we get them to do that kind of that breakdown, and I think, yes, it's critical because the different groups, a commercial fisher and a small-scale fisher, have very different vulnerability.
The point that you made is very important. I think that's for the audience as well, because unless and until when you're doing PRAs in the communities, you often tend to get a heterogeneous group, and if you want to be more accurate and fine-tune the results, then as you're pointing out, it has to be, you've got to design the whole interaction in such a way that you can disaggregate by gender or by the economic groups which are there. That gives much better results. Okay, I'm going to take in one last question before we move to the next part, and Satya.
Well, Satya from FAO, Delhi office. I just wanted to say a couple of things. In this process, I think the major strength is to work with the local NGO, which is living with the community. So it's important that we as an NGO do not go. There are many NGOs, but we need to have, what is the strength of an NGO? They can mobilize community. Full stop. They don't know the subject. Let's assume that way. If you're working on water, they may not be the water expert. There is a NGO which has a capacity of water, there is a capacity of agriculture and so forth. So it's very important. We have done that kind of things, that we pick the local NGO in each of the area. And that's the question which I think Mukesh raised. What is the size? How are we trying to use that PRA or the participatory toolkit to reach out maximum people? So we need to find local NGOs which can work with the community. Then what we need to do, whoever working, technical organizations and so forth, handhold them, build the capacity of NGOs so that they deliver to the community. It's other way around, rather than we trying to say what is to be done. They need to demand what they want. And therefore, when we work in the climate change and other approaches, despite all this social mapping, we also need to make an institutional arrangement by which they see the climate changing. Seeing is believing. The concept of FAO Farm Field School is one of those which we are trying to work on, climate field school, because that helps, because you can always talk about past, but then if you put a kind of village level weather or rain gauge station, they will see 10 years later also, they know what has changed. They can relate back what was the last season, what is the new season, and they bring the decision, the best interventions and options which they do have. And that's where they try to build the capacity and take it up. Just to conclude that I also like to just make a point, to supplement Kenya, that after the Durban, there was a very big coverage in the science about the FAO, the climate smart agriculture. That does provide you few more toolkits which are working in different parts, and that you can try and access whichever level online. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya. So let's move on now And I would request Rachna to start off with a presentation. Rachna is going to talk on, or make a presentation on the Climate Navigator Toolkit. I leave it to her to explain what that is and give us more details.
Thanks, Dhrupad. Good afternoon, everyone. I am from the GIZ India office, and basically I would like to talk about Climate Navigator Toolkit, or Klimalutse as it's called. And this was developed by the German Development Environmental Agency, UBA. And from there itself, you can imagine that being a German toolkit, it was too complicated. I'm sorry if I put it like very bluntly, but this was basically developed for the local authorities, and it had a lot of forms and templates for developing the local strategy. So basically that was from where we picked it up. And what I'm planning to do is now that I will talk 2 minutes very briefly about the toolkit, and then I go guide you through a video, basically addressing the question which was on Vietnam, that how do you implement this toolkit with the community. So I will have very brief clips on where community is presenting on the different modules of this toolkit. So this entire toolkit is about 5 modules. I just saw it's very similar to the FAO's approach on first module, basically talking about introduction to the climate change, terminology and this vulnerability, adaptive capacity, this sort of terminology, how do you use it with the community, so that clarify the concepts to the local NGOs and to the community. Then we move on to the step 2, where we talk about how do you communicate now this information to the local people. And then moving to the step 3, where you say these are the risks, this is the perspectives that community feels that these are our risks or the impacts that they have been analyzing over the years. And then you come up to the module 4, where we basically talk about prioritized impacts and related adaptation measures or mitigation measures. And in this project, in the end, we come towards adaptation strategy, a local adaptation and mitigation strategy, where we clearly talk about the proposed measures and what is implemented by the project, and which is the next level to be taken up by the local authorities. So in some areas, the video talks, and the other places I will be talking about. So basically, this project is a EU-funded project implementing in the east coast of India, which you see, it's a very vulnerable area covering Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, 2 cities in 2 states in India, and basically talking about 18 rural villages, 9 in Andhra, 9 in Tamil Nadu, and 6 cities. So this project not only covers the rural communities, but we are also trying to link them to the cities. The key activities, as I mentioned, vulnerability and needs assessment, development of local adaptation mitigation guides or the strategies, implementation of pilot projects, and capacity building, not only at the level of the community but also at the level of the local authorities, and assistance strategy for the local authorities for implementing some of the vulnerability and needs assessment, and then visibility and networking. And these are the partners of the project, with GIZ being the lead applicant, and Adelphi, Academy of Gandhian Studies in Andhra Pradesh, and in Tamil Nadu being Avai. So like every EU project, we also basically have an overarching goal of trying to work at the level of the National Action Plan on Climate Change of India, which basically talks about, and the core issues that we are trying to address at the national level is to integrate climate change at the local level and district level planning, management and redevelopment of the coastal areas and mangroves, improve the livelihoods and community resilience. At the MSUA level or at the regional level in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, we basically try to support the implementation of the state action plan, which is right now there in Andhra Pradesh, but in Tamil Nadu it is still in process. There we try to provide this bottom-up strategy that have been developed with the communities, develop and implement pilot measures, improve the capacities of the local authorities, and integration and replication of pilots, as well as networking. At the community level, we try to focus on improving the infrastructure for reducing the vulnerability of the community on 3 issues: CCA, CCM, and DRR. So in this, we are also trying to work towards the CCM issue, which I feel it's very different, because at the village or the community level, when you go and talk to them about their energy needs, it's a very different concept which you're altogether putting to a village. So, the challenges that we are trying to address is, as I mentioned earlier as well, high exposure, high sensitivity, and the less adaptive capacity. Now basically we go into a clip or a bite for a community from Tamil Nadu, where they talk about what challenges they have been facing. So basically this is the module 1 of the toolkit, where they try to express how climate change is impacting their life, their livelihood, and their survival in that community.
அப்புறம் பார்த்தீங்கன்னா சுற்றி இப்போ எல்லாம் ஃப்ளாட் ஆகிடுச்சு, இது ஏரியா ஃபுல்லாக ஃப்ளாட் ஆகிடுச்சு. ஏன்னா விவசாயம் பண்ண முடியல, ஏன்னா பருவநிலை மாறி போச்சு. பருவநிலை மாறிடுச்சுன்னா விவசாயம் பண்ண முடியல, அதனால தான் கம்ப்ளீட்டாக சேல்ஸ் போயிட்டு லாஸ்ட்டாக வருது. அது என்ன சார், அதான் எங்கள் நிலம், அதை சேல்ஸ் பண்ணிட்டேன். சேல்ஸ் பண்ணிட்டு வாங்கணும்னு வச்சுக்கிறாங்க, கல் போட்டு எல்லோ கலர் கல் போட்டு வச்சுக்கிறாங்க சார். அதான் சார் இப்போ நான் 2004 2005 சரியான வெள்ளம். 2010 பார்த்தீங்கன்னா போன வருஷம் கொஞ்சம் சுமார். 2009 வந்து வறட்சி சார். தொடர்ந்து இப்போ 3 வருஷமாக வறட்சி, இப்போ 2 வருஷமாக தான் சார் மழை பெஞ்சிச்சு. மழை பெஞ்சு அது கூட தண்ணி பெஞ்சிச்சு. அப்புறம் அது விட்டு என்ன செய்யணும், கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சம் விவசாயம் அப்படியே கொஞ்சம் கொஞ்சம் குறைஞ்சின்னு வர்றதுனால என்ன செய்யுதுன்னா, கொத்தனார் வேலைக்கு கட்டிட அசிஸ்டண்ட்டுக்கு, அப்புறம் வந்து மற்ற தொழிலுக்கு எங்கே வெளியே ஏரியாவுக்கு போயிட்டு.
This is another region in Tamil Nadu, which basically, just to show you an idea or give you an idea on how vulnerable they are, and this is a community which is relocated after the tsunami in 2006. So it is on both the sides. It has a sea as well as a Buckingham Canal, irrigation river body going just next to it. This toolkit that we talk about now, it's this facilitator's manual basically, and it compiles of 5 modules, where we first talk about introduction to the project, introduction to the terminology of climate change, clear the concepts of adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. Going into now the module 3, which basically covers the key development sectors, whether it's water, forestry, what sector do we want to talk about in that particular community, and what are the major climate impacts. At this module itself, you tell the local NGOs on how do you prioritize the impacts. Because it's very clear when you go to a village, it might be they put all the issues that they have during a discussion that you are having. But it is a task of an NGO to identify, to put a climate lens to it. This is adaptation, this is mitigation, this is a development project, not as such an adaptation or a DRR issue. So that's what is clearly talked about in the module 3. In module 4, we come on the implementation of the pilot measures, which addresses both the adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. And in module 5, develop the strategy for local adaptation and mitigation. I have this manual, but I'm not carrying many copies of it to save some bit of paper. And if anyone is interested, they can just write to me and we'll send it. In terms of capacity building, this project addresses the human resource, like the individual capacity, enhancing individual capacities through training of trainers module, then organizational or institutional strengthening for assistance to the local and regional planners, local authorities and regional planners, but also it helps in creation of networks, as well as linkages towards the policy aspects by engaging with the stakeholders, as well as working towards the state and national action plans. So when I talk about the module 1, which is basically on the climate change and the terminology that has been done. Now if you go, this training that we did with the local NGOs, there we have a topic on how do you now communicate this information to the community. So that's how, like during the training session itself, they did a role play on how are they going to communicate this information to, it's a long clip, but I've just taken a bite of it. So this is in Telugu. I don't have an English version of it, but maybe by the actions you will be able to guess what they're trying to talk about. So this clip was basically whatever I also understand. It's about this entire role play was that this is a community which used to do a lot of fishing in that particular region, and now their fish catch is decreasing. So they, the other guy who was standing in the corner, then in the later part of the role play, they would just like to move to another village. So then they have local NGOs who come in and say, why do you want to migrate from this area to another area, where they explain these are the impacts that they are feeling, or there's a reduced fish catch. So that's how the entire process they are trying to explain to the community. Now coming to the module 3 on identification of risk and opportunities. So basically this covers on the vulnerability and needs assessment methodology, which is again a very detailed and extensive VNA, where you train the local NGOs on the VNA templates. Then how do they gather this climate information, what kind of a PRA tools do they apply, what information is restricted to the trainers, and what goes to the people who will be actually in the field for conducting the vulnerability and needs assessment. So these stepwise process, and in the end the VNA comes up with the pilot measures, the local adaptation and mitigation guides, evaluation criteria of these pilots that we are developing, and how do you evaluate the pilot, what is the operational maintenance structure, how sustainable these pilots are. So the participatory rule appraisal tools that were used, I think Dhrupad put a lot of focus on this thing that what tools do we want to present. So I have some photos on the tools that we are using. Basically, like these tools have been used since years, but as you can see, like social mapping or resource mapping is a very common tool used with the communities. But to this tool, to apply a climate lens, we developed climate icons, basically symbols. Suppose if you say sea level rise is an impact, or temperature rise, or sudden or erratic events. So there we have developed these 4 or 5 icons, which then community would place it on their map to identify this is the area which is affected. Here we have a canal, here is our agricultural farm. So basically the tool is adjusted to the climatic focus. So how this resource map is being developed now. This is for a mountain village, a different project of ours. So in the tool that we saw initially, it was about water mapping in a mountain village, where you can see elderly gentlemen focusing a lot on put a water here, put a tree here, so how focused they have while the exercise is being implemented. Then timeline, seasonal calendar, focus group discussion. So it was not, it was a mix of PRA tools that was used for a particular community, depending on their needs. Now, basically coming to the identification of pilot measures, as I said, the project has a focus on interlinking CCA, CCM and DRI. When you have to identify a pilot measure, this focus has to be there, that whether it's a CCA measure or it's a normal developmental activity. So for this, we have a evaluation criteria which covers basically not only the administrative criteria focusing on the issues which are there with the community, like whether they own the land or it is a forestry land. So that those sort of administrative elements you want to assess during the evaluation of the pilots. Then you come to the cost and time requirements. Then the in-house in-house capacity with the community, whether it's a technology that could be implemented with the community, or there is some technology which we are trying to put in from Germany or from other agencies, which is very complicated and which can't be implemented as such at the community level. So those sort of issues are done during the evaluation and selection of the pilot measures. So this basically, this group discussion is on the community's major 3 impacts that we assess
migration in the area.
and the measure that we
propose. Almost about 3/4 of the village migrates over for the sake of employment. Erratic rainfall is one feature. And then second, increase in temperatures. And these are the 2 direct elements which they have been experiencing. And also seawater seepage. So they are proposing on the same basis of their own experience. They are proposing about more than about 50 to 70 compounds.
రిజర్వాయర్ నుంచి నీళ్లు కనుక వచ్చినట్టయితే ఆ నీళ్ళని కొంచెం కనుక మనం గ్రామంలో కనుక జాగ్రత్తగా కాపాడుకోగలిగితే ఆ నీటిని మన దొరువుల ద్వారా పొలాల్లో ఉంచుకుంటే కనుక దొరువుల ద్వారా మనకి నాట్లు పడితే కనుక కనీసం మనకి బతుకుతెరువు పడడానికి అవకాశం కలుగుతుందని చెప్పి మీరు భావిస్తున్నారు.
So basically, how do they perceive what are the major 3 or 4 impacts they want to address, and what pilot measure they propose for it? And also there is a discussion on the operation and maintenance aspects of that pilot measure. In terms of implementation, it's all community participation, so community contribution in terms of in-kind contribution. In some of the pilots, we also try to ensure that we have not only contribution from our side, but also there are funds available at the panchayat level, like the local level. Then also there are funds available with the legislative elected members of that village. The MP LADS local area development scheme which is available. So from there also we can access some of the resources. Some photos on community contribution and then implementation of the pilot measure. Like construction of that farm board that was discussed in the community itself.
Rachna, can you wind up?
Coming to the last, the module 5 that basically talks about developing a strategy. So this, as I said earlier, it combines both the top-down and bottom-up approaches, where you even have the scientific projections for that particular region, which is not that we have tried to downscale some or have some scenarios and all, but we have just taken up from the reports of IPCC for that particular state, not for a community as such. So scientific information and then the vulnerability assessment from the community itself. Then you propose the measures, so the local adaptation guide compiles of this entire process, the proposed measures and the measure in detail that will be implemented by the project. So these LAMGs are basically the tools as a living document. It's not that once it is done with the community, it will just be a paper document lying in the shell. So basically it's a living document which the community updates it regularly during the project period as well as towards the end. And it is a tool which is which offers like a platform to discuss the needs of the communities, priorities of the communities with the local governments, and how to promote the participatory process.
Thank you, Rachna. Okay. So the last presentation, I'd request you to bear with me. Although we are running fast out of time. I'm going to go very quickly through a PRA toolkit that we used to look into what were the perceptions of communities in terms of weather or climate variability, and what are the responses in terms of what they're doing as a response to the impacts which are there. And also touch on a second process mechanism which takes this information up the scale from the communities to the local governance level and upwards for bringing in the support which is required from the governments, right? Now, the basic thing, as I mentioned earlier, is if you want to have plant adaptation to be more effective, you require information. And this information you require to understand what is happening on the ground, a reality check as it were. The second thing is that you've got to have a process mechanism how you can take this information upwards, and it has to be a two-way flow so that responses are brought about. Now, we had this toolkit which we put together. These are common participatory rural appraisal toolkits where we looked at weather perceptions. What are the weather perceptions of communities? Do they see this change? And it tells us about seasonality, duration, and change that they see. Hazard ranking, which was partly pointed out by Ken earlier. Seasonal calendar in terms of the activities. The Venn diagram, which shows institutional mechanisms, and the dependency matrix, which is to assess adaptive capacities and the natural resource endowment which is there, right? Now, this was done in 3 countries across India, Nepal, and Bhutan. The first one, which is looking at weather changes. What we get out of this tool is major weather events, when it starts, the duration, the intensity. When you have a historical recall, what you could see is weather shifts. You can see the changes which are there in terms of intensity, and you can also see the variations within each of the regions. You can also identify the weather-induced hazards which are there, whether they are droughts, floods, flash floods, or pests. Now, just to give you an idea about how you can use this to then compute, this is a trend analysis that we do based on the PRA. And what you see is very clearly, you can see the rainfall duration decreasing as you move from Western Himalayas to the Eastern Himalayas, right? Now, mind you, this is based only on PRA, right? But you can get results, you can analyze them for bringing about quite a lot of very interesting information. Here, the second slide shows you as you move upwards in elevation. And you can clearly see that the duration of rainfall has changed or reduced when you go to the higher altitudes. Similarly, when you look at the tool of hazard ranking, what you can get is what are the weather events which severely impact livelihood activities, and what is the ranking given by the communities themselves, right? This is on a scale of 0 to 5, and 5 is the strongest impact of a particular weather event on the livelihoods. The next is the seasonal calendar, which if you have used PRA, you're very used to this, looking at what do people do at different seasons. The reason we use this seasonal calendar is when you put together the weather events, or the first calendar which is looking at weather, and the seasonal calendar, and based on the hazard ranking, you identified which are the main hazards, you simply put them together, use a ribbon which runs through the months of the highest, and it's easy for communities to see what weather event is impacting what activity. Now, based on that, then you go into an iterative process to look at what are the impacts, what are the responses that the communities are doing, right? And where are the support that they require. Quickly taking you to the results, you can actually compute this to see what are the crops being impacted, where, in terms of locational aspects. You can look at what the responses that the communities do, whether these responses are coping mechanisms or they're adaptive mechanisms. When we look at institutional dependency, it clearly tells us which are the institutions, whether they're formal or informal institutions, and what are the support services that they give. Where are these available? Are they accessible for the communities? The last thing that we do is look at seasonal dependency on resources. In other words, the endowment. And this is very important if you want to assess adaptive capacities which are there of the communities. Based on all this, when we need to take this information, one, in regard to decision making at the community level, and then at the local and provincial government level. So what we did was what we term as the adaptation learning highway. It's basically a horizontal and vertical information and knowledge management approach. What it does is, first, there's a community-to-community interaction and exchange in terms of what responses they are, validation of that, and it's a peer evaluation of the adaptive mechanisms which are there. Through this, you can also identify what are the needs of the communities, what are the concerns of the communities. The next scale or level is to take this with the scientific community and discuss about the scientific basis of the coping or the adaptive mechanisms, whether they are scientifically valid, whether this can be improved and built upon, or there are new approaches which can add to this. At the same time, what we do is, from this, we take it to the local government level, where issues and concerns are placed with the decision makers and the programs and schemes identified in terms of support. Now, when we did this in the field, in most of the places, the local government was found this very useful because they could identify which are the departments which require to gear up to meet the needs of the communities. There are certain issues, however, which cannot be dealt at the district level, and these are policy issues which are there. So what we do is take it either to the national level, depending on the country or where we are working, or to the sub-regional levels. And these are forums where you have senior policymakers, you have senior decision makers, who are then apprised of what the community needs are, what are the policy refinements which are required. So with this, I give you just a glimpse of tools which can be used at the community level to do assessments, and also a process mechanism which can then take it up the scales and the levels for decision making. And I would now open up for questions, discussions. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Chanthun from Cambodia. My addressing is Toolkit, also from the previous speaker, and very nice Toolkit for the implementation adaptation planning in community at community level. My understanding the knowledge of the level of community is limited. So my question regarding to this toolkit, what is the level of this implementation of the toolkit, and regarding to the COP17 for the national adaptation plan is very need of for the LDC country like Cambodia, and we have a driving by country priority and feasibility to revise from the NAPA document that the COP17 need to adopt guideline and some this modality to allow Cambodia or LDC country to formulate and implement medium and long term for the NAPA. So my question regarding to this toolkit, how does the planning for the adaptation-based community-based adaptation to climate change linked to the NAP?
Anyone from the panel wants to take it?
Well,
perhaps.
I think just taking the toolkit from FAO as an example, I think it's a very good entry point to have a very large-scale training in governmental organizations. It can be national level, or it can be provincial level, or it can be local level. And it can be also fully copied in your language, and then you produce your own version to use for your own training. So that's one of the ways to make the most of it.
I would just supplement Ken's response to you. What we have tried to do with the toolkit that I presented is basically to generate the information and awareness of what is required to bring about the local adaptation plans, which are then linked to the NAPAs. Right? So in that sense, there's a continuity in the two. Right? And these we have used, as you have seen, in 3 countries. At the local level, whether it is at the district, which is in India, or in Nepal, it is in VDC levels, right? The administrators have found this to be very useful. And they find it's not just in the context of climate change, but general, the general responses of the government to what are needs to the community. This gives them a very good picture of what is actually required. So needs are identified, and then they can accordingly tailor whatever existing programs there are to address these needs. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably this is also for the panelists and also probably the audience. I'm Anja Srinivasan from Asian Development Bank. I just, first of all, I thank all the presenters, the excellent presentations and very interesting and sometimes innovative. But of course, there is a sort of, as researchers, as academicians, there is always an interest to develop a tool, and everybody claims their tool works best. And it's quite natural, and you will always get some community support where you develop the tool. The tool developed in Nepal may not be applicable in Cambodia or the vice versa, and it's not something. I wanted to know, both from the panel members and also audience, if possible, has there been any independent assessment of the toolkits that have worked on a wide range of either geographic areas or communities? Is there any independent assessment of the toolkits developed so far? I mean, somebody said 30, somebody said 50, and they're at various levels. That's one question. Second point is, I'm doing in Southeast Asia, and we are sponsoring several adaptation projects as well as mitigation projects. What we find is that climate change, as you all understand, is transboundary, and there are many maladaptations happening. Through your toolkit development, have you really been able to identify certain maladaptations which should not be encouraged by the communities? Because especially in transboundary issue, like in water resources management or something, the community upstream thinks that is the best adaptation strategy for them, but maybe affecting adversely the downstream community, or the vice versa. There are many, because both spatially as well as temporally, you can have maladaptation. What is good adaptation today may be a bad adaptation after 5 years. So the thing is that, again, I would like to know through this development, it's again for the panel members as well as the audience, are there any examples of maladaptations, both spatially and temporally, that have been designed?
Can I quickly respond to that, and then you can? I think your first point in terms of toolkits, I'm not speaking so much in terms of the toolkits developed specifically for climate change adaptation. But if you look at PRA toolkits, and most of the tools that you have seen are all PRA, are all participatory rural appraisal toolkits. They're nothing new. They're things which have already been used for ages now, right? They have a universality in application. Whatever toolkits, seasonal calendar, Venn diagram, right? These are things which have been used all over the world. And there are very good assessments which have been done by IDS. There are other organizations which have done that, which give you a very objective view of what works and what doesn't work. I think an important point is how you use these tools and for what. That's very, very important. On the point of maladaptations, in our
experience when we have worked in most of these villages, there are several examples of maladaptation. If you look at Uttarakhand, or if you look at Nepal, many of the places what communities have done is they have changed crops. They've replaced traditional crops with something which is new. And the reason being, it's not so much for climate change as for income generation. One specific example is the widespread adoption of ginger as a crop. Now, as an agriculturalist, anyone will tell you how it can be a maladaptation and having implications for a long time. Similarly, what you find is there are adaptations in terms of shifts from farming into non-farm activities, but depending on such resources as sand mining or getting into mining. So there are several examples that you can come up with this. These tools do help you in bringing out that.
What I would like to know is that has that assessment been done on maladaptations? I mean, the reason is that I also know some examples of maladaptations, but it is important that as much as we are focusing more on.
I'm not aware. I'm not aware of.
That's right. I mean, because we are primarily focusing on database of good adaptation practices. We have UNFCCC websites and all that stuff, but we also want to focus on maladaptations before recommending. I mean, it's to have it like a screen tool.
No, I just wanted to add on this point of in Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu there is a lot of prawn farming, which is not we haven't suggested them as an alternative source of livelihood. But then, if you have a pond which is dysfunctional now, and you come to us to say that renovate it as a pilot measure for us, so that's why I said that during selecting a pilot measure, there is a very proper evaluation criteria which we try to follow. And it's also evaluated by a third party, the pilot that is selected finally. So at least during the pilot implementation stage, you make a very clear strategy on what is the pilot you're trying to adapt. And if there is any no regret, there are no regret issues to it. But as such, I have also not come across to any
I don't think that
study on maladaptation.
I'm going to take the last question now because we are already 15 minutes into T10. Yes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very, very short comment. Since we are on this panel on the synergies between adaptation toolkits and the methods in practice, I noticed that in the presentation, one of the problems is the use of the language. You've got to know the language of the community in order to achieve the synergy. If you don't have the language, you can't.
Thank you very much for that comment. I think that's a very fundamental thing. But maybe Joe would want to.
Just as somebody who spent the last eight years learning to speak and write Thai, I'd just like to comment on this whole business of language. Sometimes I go to regional forums and people debate for a very long time what exactly is sensitivity and have very detailed discussions, and then the instant that you translate it into the Thai language, all of that disappears. So I think, it's very true. Language, and the important thing is the underlying understanding, and not the words, not terminology.
It's the nuances, very important.
Exactly. I think I'm not going to take in any more questions unless you're willing to get into, forgo your tea time. But in conclusion, I think I would like to give my panel a hand, and I'm sure all of you would agree.